So clearly, he has spent an enormous amount of time working on the Middle East over the last several months since the attacks of Hamas on October 7th, and trying to bring the hostages, the Israeli hostage and American hostages home, and achieving a ceasefire through that process, while also making sure that enough humanitarian assistance enters Gaza during this time of conflict.
Well, and as Joe mentioned, that may now include trying to get aid through Gaza, through the waterways by establishing a port. But of course, one of the ongoing conversations around the conflict in the Middle East, not just when it comes to the direct conflict between Israel and Hamas, but also what we're seeing in the Red Sea with the Houthis, some of the other activity has been going on, is whether or not it was going to be disruptive to energy flows, which of course is in your purview, Amos. Should we expect to hear from the president about that tonight to potentially ease concerns that what is happening abroad will affect prices at the pump at home?
Well, I think, as you know, we've talked about this before. The president has been laser focused on the American economy and bringing costs down. And over the last 3 years, he has really directed the economy and presiding today over the strongest economy on the planet, that has a lower inflation, lower cost to the American families, and that includes energy prices, while at the same time we have manufacturing and with low unemployment. And that is really, he did this by focusing on bringing costs down to the middle class, to the American public, and focusing on the strength of that middle class. So when it comes to how do you get to that, to achieve this kind of an economy, not only today, as we sit here, but also focusing on the future, you have to look at what's happening domestically and internationally. And despite the fact that the Houthis have been attacking ships in the Red Sea, costs have been the cost impact has been muted. We have worked with the private sector, with the shipping companies and everyone else to make sure that alternatives are there and that the costs don't affect consumers, especially here at home. And I think that's been largely achieved. And the president will continue to focus, as he'll outline today, on the policies of expanding and accelerating the energy transition while ensuring that the current energy mix that we have today is maintained, is strong, and is affordable.
You were just in Lebanon, Amos Hochstein, meeting with leaders there. Are you confident, following your talks and your time spent there with leaders, that Israel will not open a wider war, a new front to the north?
Well, as you said, I was in Lebanon on Monday and in Israel on Tuesday, and to make sure that we convey to all sides that a diplomatic option here is the right way to go, to enable Israelis to go back to their homes in the northern Israel safely and securely without worrying about further attacks. And the same is true for Lebanese communities returning to their homes. We've had a sort of a low level or a lower level of conflict going on for 5 months. And the president has been clear that he believes that we should exhaust all diplomatic efforts to get there. And I believe that it is possible. Clearly, all the dots in the Middle East conflict are connected, whether we like that or not. And so we have to work on this in unison with some of the other efforts that we're doing. But we are clearly pushing for a peaceful and secure diplomatic option.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amos, part of what the president will be doing tonight is making the case for another 4 years, because if he is not elected to a second term, his work ends next January. And I just wonder, when we're thinking about what's happening in the Middle East, how much you think conflict there will be resolved, how much progress realistically can be made by November or at the latest January, or will this take another 4 years to sort out?
Look, I think the president's been working tirelessly and personally to bring an end to this conflict as soon as possible, to bring back the hostages home, and to do that while maintaining a ceasefire, and to bring an end to this conflict as soon as possible, much sooner than the timelines that you're referring to. He is very focused on this. So I think we're going to talk about, I think you're right. The speech tonight is about what we've done and what he has been able to do over the last 3 years, and where we're going to be going in the next 4. And I think that the American leadership around the world is without question enhanced and strengthened. Keeping the world together has been critically important. maintaining the strongest economy in the world gives us additional leverage and ability to lead. And look, there's no doubt that there's connectivity between what we do at home and what we do around the world. Strengthening democracy, strengthening our institutions, and making sure that we have a healthy economy that is not just about based on an old-time scenario or vision of enriching 1 or 2% of the economy, and that will promote the rest, but rather building out that middle class, creating a stronger economy that is focused on the future. That future that you're talking about is what gives us the strength. The Inflation Reduction Act, I can tell you wherever I go in the world, even in Lebanon, in the middle of a conflict, they talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and what the president is doing to strengthen the American economy.
Lastly, Amos, you've been very generous with your time. I want to ask you about the president's pause on LNG export approvals. I don't know if this is an issue he plans to address tonight. I suspect this might come up, but I wonder if it's possible this turns into a permanent moratorium.
I think what the president announced, or actually the Department of Energy announced, is a pause so that we can look at the factors. But we have to level set because there's been a lot of talk about this. The reality today is that we are the largest exporter of LNG in the world. And from that base in the market of being the largest, we will double our exports capacity between now and 2028. So what we're saying is that is not in question and that is not on pause. What is on pause is to say beyond that, beyond 2020, beyond 2030, do we need to look for a minute and say, with such exponential growth that we've seen, do we need to look at the economic impacts, on the market impact? And do we have to look at what the environmental and climate impacts are on the communities that live along our Gulf Coast before we say we're going to give more permits? So do we even need more facilities is a good question to ask. I don't know the answer to that. There have been different projections of where demand is going to be. So I think his focus is going to continue to be tonight, tomorrow, for the next 5 years on accelerating the energy transition, but making sure we have the energy mix and the energy security for us and for our allies.